if you want to survive as a culture, you've got to sow enough grain or whatever your staple crop is to cover a bad year, which means that in a good year you're going to have a surplus of grain. And the most obvious way of using that and keeping some elasticity in the economic system is livestock.
That was Simon Fairlie. You'll be hearing more from him today.
Welcome to the Agricology podcast. I'm Matt Smee.
And I'm Janie Coldbeck. Across this season, we're exploring the ideas and practices around optimising carrying capacity for livestock. We'll be in conversation with farmers, advisors, vets and academics as we explore what optimal carrying capacity means to them and how this concept can be supported on farms to help the animal, the environment and the farmer.
Yeah, my name's Simon Fairlie. I'm here at Monkton Wyld Court in Dorset, which is an intentional community, and I run the small farm. It's a micro dairy with Jersey cows and pigs. It's probably the oldest dairy of its kind in Britain, as it's been going since 1943. Unfortunately, I'm about to be evicted as new trustees have taken over the place. But that's another story. As well as running the farm, I sell scythes, and that's what brings in a bit of money. And I'm also a co-editor of the Land magazine, well, the founder of the Land magazine, which has been going since 2005 and is still staggering on.
Do you want to give a bit of an overview of operations in terms of number of cows, how you're managing them?
This is Monkton Wyld Court, which is it's a community, and we've got a big house that takes in conferences, training courses and so forth, and yoga people, and feed them. We're feeding probably on average 20 to 25 people a day, and I produce all the dairy produce, so that's butter, milk, cheese, halloumi, cream and yoghurt, plus pork, and I also do potatoes and onions and a little bit. So it's basically a subsistence operation, but it's on a scale that's a bit above the family scale, and it works quite well because the milk is basically delivered with it's 100 food yards and no packaging whatsoever, really. It eliminates all the packaging, and basically we just milk into buckets, hand milk into buckets, put it into churns, take it 100 yards up the road and stick it in the fridge, and then it's, in inverted commas, sold, it's delivered. So its value is, currently being organic and Jersey, about 180 a litre. So although I'm missing out on economies of scale by only having 2 Jersey cows, I have milked 3, but after COVID we went down to 2. So they've got no economies of scale, or rather diseconomies of scale is what we have. But on the other hand, we have economies of distribution, and that makes up for it quite a bit. And also it's ecologically preferable in terms of lack of transport and packaging and so forth. It might seem a bit niche, and I suppose it is a bit niche, because there are a few other communities around Britain that do the same thing, but I find it interesting because it's also a microcosm of something that could be a lot bigger.
So you could scale the model.
You could scale the model up so that, and certainly do it with schools, hospitals, prisons and so forth. Any institution like that has a canteen could effectively be running its own farm, producing fresh food, obviously much better food, with a minimum of transport and packaging, but rather more effective economies of scale than I've got with just 2 cows. It would make so much sense for that to happen in my view. You could also do it on the village scale, and that's what sort of community-supported agriculture tries to do, but of course its aficionados are spread out over a much wider area than just the village. If all the people who lived in this little hamlet bought milk from the local dairy instead of trundling off to Bridport to buy it, then that would support a decent-sized farm. And of course, if the price of petrol and energy went up significantly, and if there was a more effective bans on disposable packaging and so forth, then it would become still more competitive.
We're sort of exploring this idea of optimal carrying capacity. And
Yeah.
there's landscape level or a farm level. I'm just asking everyone sort of what they think or what they believe optimal carrying capacity is and what it means and what the importance it is to agricultural systems.
Well, talking about this particular bit of land, the optimal carrying capacity, without doubt, is dairy. There's just no doubt about it. I get about 1,000 litres an acre, which is roughly enough to feed one human being per acre, and that's off grade 3, grade 4 grass, rough grassland. If I was doing beef, I'd get about a third as much nutrition from that. But also, the other thing the dairy produces is a decent amount of fat. We get almost all our butter. For some reason, it doesn't make butter when they're on hay, which is rather annoying. I don't know what it is, but our cows eating hay, and the machine that doesn't turn, it's infuriating. But that's like a third of the year and only not even a quarter of the milk. The thing about dairy is it produces a lot more fat than beef will. And the fat, actually, if you're not importing loads of vegetable oil from Indonesia and South America or wherever, then fat is what's in short supply in Britain. And the other way it produces fat, of course, is because any whey from the cheese or any milk that gets spoilt or whatever, that goes to the pigs. The pigs are a natural corollary of the dairy, and they produce loads of fat as well. We render all the fat in them, and it makes really nice lard. It's good stuff. People like George Monbiot are very rude about lard, but he doesn't like lardy cake for some reason. I don't know why. But we do. The other thing about the pigs is that they also consume the food waste. Every time I say this, the food trade standards come and put a movement order on me because it's illegal. But it's so stupid, it really is so stupid. And then, of course, the manure goes to the vegetable garden, which produces a fair proportion of the veg. And then there's a small arable area which does the potatoes and onions on a scale that's a little bit too big for the walled garden. That doesn't get much manure because it's on a four-year rotation. 2 years clover lay, 1 year potatoes, cover crop of turnips, 1 year onions, and then back to lay.
And the lay is grazed by the cows.
Yeah, or make hay. The poor things, they look at it. It's the best grass on the whole place. Maybe not from the ecologist's point of view, but from the cow's point of view, they're allowed to graze around it, and we're keeping it for hay, and they're looking at this stuff. Why doesn't he let us have that?
There's the benefit of the food system, this kind of microcosm of the food system for having the cows. What's the benefit for them on the environment they're in sort of the landscape that you've got here? What are they sort of doing? How you're managing them? What's the positive impacts they're having on the space?
Well, basically, they keep it in grass, and if there weren't the cows, then the grass would disappear, and it would go over to bracken and brambles, which is effectively what quite a bit. When I came here, it was starting to get quite neglected, and there's one field that was just 6 foot in brambles and bracken, and then eventually, I suppose, it would return to woodland. There's already a pretty decent amount of woodland around here anyway. We don't need. Well, we need more. We don't need much more. Obviously, an environment that has both grass and woodland in it in a balanced amount is going to have a much more diversity than one that is just woodland, which is what would happen if it got rewilded. I've had ecologists come and do wildlife, plant surveys and so forth, and what they're keen on is the variety of diversity in the meadows, what that offers to the insect population and so forth. So you've got all sorts of butterflies and insects and things that you wouldn't get in the woodland, but you've got other stuff in the woodland, and then there's various birds that move between them both and so forth. So it just adds to the richness of the environment. And you look out here, and you kind of, it just looks beautiful, and it's and you think, well, why would anybody want to rewild this? It's just like so rich and so productive, and it keeps small scale communities going, and
so really that mixture is the strength rather than just thinking we just need to rewild. It's
yes. So, I'm not totally against rewilding in certain situations, but and there's certainly areas of Britain that could do with more tree planting because they've just gone over the top on arable. Whereas here, 8 acres of grass, there's 5 acres that belong to Monkton Wyld Court and another 3 that I rent. And that's enough for 2 cows and a couple of followers, just, including making the hay.
So how are you on the making hay and grazing strategies? Sort of how are you managing their feed and sort of?
It's about 2 acres gets put down to hay, and in a good year, like last year, I get two cuts out of it. When it's dry, I only get 1 cut. I don't get enough hay out of that to feed all 4 livestock. Last year, I got enough hay just about for the 2 cows, but had to buy in sufficient for the heifers. So it's basically the same field staying hay, and 2 of them were reseeded, but years ago, and they've kind of gone back to something one's very different from the other, but they're still very liked by the cows.
Looking at that, it's a very diverse grassland that's in there. So you say it was reseeded. Are you reseeding it with like a traditional native mix?
Well, I reseeded with last year's Cholderton mix from Cotswold Seeds, but I used something from Oliver's on that one, which I reseeded in 2011, and then it kind of reverts back to what it wanted to do. But the ecologists who came round, when I said I'd reseeded, they said, "Oh, we don't really like reseeding." But when they looked at it, they would say, "Oh, I'm quite surprised at actually how nice it's gone back." And actually, it was full of flowers and butterflies and things.
It's almost the native grassland that's there was getting a bit tired. By putting something else in, it almost brought that stuff back in a way.
Well, I don't know, maybe. Well, I mean, actually, I reseeded it because it hadn't been grazed for 2 years, and it was 90% plantain and knapweed, and the cows went down there, took one look at it, and they came, "Oh, where's the grass?" Yeah, because it went to, although it's been a dairy here since 1943, and I've got all the paperwork back to 1943, all the cow movements and things. When it went permacultural between 2008 and 2010, and during which there was no grazing. And so when I arrived, there were tussocks everywhere and this immense quantity of knapweed. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm strict grazing with cows, then the 2 heifers come behind them, and then it gets rested for about 3 weeks in summer. And that seems to work. I mean, we don't have worms or anything like that. It does worry me a bit that with the heifers following now, if you're not careful, they keep hammering the same nice bits. It would be better if they weren't on it quite so long, I think, and there was a bit more rest. But that, because I haven't always had these heifers, but the 2 cows are getting old. One's 15 and one's 11, and the 15 one's pretty well going to be retired, and so we need 2 more to come in. Yeah.
And when you retire it, will it go to slaughter, or?
Well, I hope not. If we can find somebody who likes old cows. Yeah. I mean, you can keep them ticking on with a sort of a gallon or half a gallon a day. I've seen a 23-year-old going on that long, which of course is a good amount of milk for a family with and then they bother. A 20-year-old cow is not going to be much bother really. Yeah. So yeah, if anybody out there who wants Folly, she's a lovely cow. She's a real old trooper, and she's currently giving 7 litres a day.
Sort of going out a bit more, you have this sort of concept of default livestock. Can you just sort of talk to that and explain a bit what that is within this? You created that idea. So.
Yeah, well, 1 or 2 other people working on it as well, Tara Garnett in particular. Default livestock is actually, it's a term coined by the FAO in Livestock's Long Shadow, and they were saying, well, peasant agriculture uses default livestock, i.e. it's not the main bit, not the main objective of what they're doing, which is usually going to be grain or roots crops. It's just fulfills a useful role in certain bits, and so you're not trying to produce as much meat as you possibly can. Instead, you've got animals fulfilling various roles within the economy, and they produce a certain amount of meat, which is eaten or distributed according to the whole system. And so the various default reasons for having livestock as a sort of integral part of the ecological system are, particularly mopping up any waste that humans are too fussy to eat or simply can't digest. That's for bringing in fertility, for example, sheep harnessing grass out in the hinterland and then bringing it in the evening and depositing it in a folded field or whatever. The various livestock that come out of having to keep draft animals and using up surplus grain, because in a good year there will be a surplus grain. If you want to survive as a culture, you've got to sow enough grain or whatever your staple crop is to cover a bad year, which means that in a good year you're going to have a surplus of grain. And the most obvious way of using that and keeping some elasticity in the economic system is livestock. The other traditional way was booze, gin, the American way. But of course there are more modern forms of default agriculture, default livestock, for example, running sheep around land that is got solar panels or wind turbines on, and conservation grazing when the actual objective is to achieve some ecosystem, and the livestock are kind of incidental to that. And all that is, in fact, it's anywhere where you want to create open space rather than trees, for whatever reason. All that is potentially food for livestock. It doesn't always go to it, but I mean all the vast amounts of lawn. I mean our lawns, we mow them with a scythe, and then we give the grass to the animals, and it's and they like it. It's really nice grass. Livestock are the cheapest and easiest and most ecologically friendly way of creating open land. So all that is what I call default livestock. Oh, well, I should mention the other aspect of fertility building, of course, is lay farming, where you've got grass and clover on a rotation, and so the clover's bringing in the nitrogen. I mean, you can use all of that clover to fertilise your fields, but actually, if you're giving the clover to dairy cows, the grass and the clover to dairy cows, what's on top, you've still got all the nitrogen that's going into the roots and into the stolons left over for fertilising your crop. And then, of course, it goes through the cows, and then you've got manure, and that goes back. So the cows are although they're not an essential part of a lay system, they are a very useful incidental part that, and what they contribute is a huge amount of variation in the diet, because I mean there's any number of meat and milk and dairy products that make your porridge or whatever it is a bit more tasty.
Man can't live on porridge, oats and water alone, right?
Rather not, yes. Yeah, so all that is different forms of default livestock. In some ways, one of the most significant is the amount of waste given to cows and pigs and animals, basically, and it's actually much larger than most people think. And I've seen analysis of carrying capacity and so forth, which completely omit the fact that something like 25% or 35% or round about that area of the feed going into pigs or into dairy cattle is often simply waste products. So it's either crop residues, or spoiled crops, or it's processing waste, or it's catering waste, or it's domestic waste. And all of these add up to a very significant amount of feed, some of which is used at the moment, but often not recognised. But there are also the possibility of using this a lot more effectively. And there have been quite a few papers recently on this, one brought up by WWF. It's one by Hannah Van Zanten, and she looked at a vegan diet and reckoned that out of the food processing waste from a vegan diet, you got, I think it was 119 kilos of food that humans couldn't want to eat and that could be fed to animals. And then from this she worked out that if everybody was on a vegan diet, it would produce enough of food from the waste to provide them with about a third of their protein and a similar amount of carbohydrates. And what that means effectively is that a vegan diet is quite efficient, pretty efficient compared to a diet where you're growing a lot of grain and feeding it inefficiently to livestock. But even more efficient than a vegan diet is one that's based on agriculture, or on grain production principally, but is feeding all the waste to livestock, which are contributing meat and dairy into the diet. And then you get a much richer diet off less land than you would with a purely vegan diet. It's once you start producing grains and feeding them inefficiently to pigs, or even worse, beef, that's then the carrying capacity of the land drops significantly.
A system like yours versus an American feedlot,
Yeah.
two different worlds with emissions.
Yeah.
But what's your read on this in terms of livestock gets demonised because and vilified because of methane emissions?
Yeah.
You're a livestock producer.
Yeah.
How does it make you feel?
Well, not much fun being demonised, but I'm getting used to it, really. I mean, the methane thing is well, there's all the complexity of it. The thing is, if your herd is stable, then you're emitting a load of methane into the atmosphere. But once it's been stable for 30 or 40 years, pretty much the same amount is coming out of the atmosphere that is going in. So there's a lot of misrepresentation here.
What does that mean in this? You produce in this microcosm, which is scalable to a point, and so you want to push back against the mischaracterisation of methane in certain areas and reports, but so do the feedlot producers as well.
Yes,
So it's
yes.
it's almost you're at opposite ends of the scale. You've completely different objectives, but on this one thing, you guys almost align on it. It's quite a tricky place to be in, and criticism gets labelled because you all get bundled in together.
Yes, but I mean, you just got to be truthful. The feedlot people, I don't agree with the feedlots, but the feedlot people are right in saying that our methane emissions are being exaggerated. They're not being exaggerated if we have more and more feedlots, which is possibly the case. At the moment, anybody seems to know the only place where the beef herd is increasing is in Africa, or the main place, in the United States, in Europe, and quite a few other places. It's actually declining. I mean, there are two sets of figures, but it is absolutely vital that we don't introduce more ruminants into the world than there already are. That goes without saying. But that doesn't mean you should vilify the ones that are already there. There might be an argument for reducing in certain cases, but the thing about ruminants is, I mean, the reason why they produce methane is because they're so extremely good at digesting stuff that we can't digest. And that's a huge benefit to mankind. It's always been a huge benefit, to mankind for the last 10,000 years. And it's to reject it is a bit daft, frankly.
Yeah, fantastic. Fertility in the wrong place and environmental degradation through livestock production.
Yeah.
So just want to touch a bit on the damage that livestock can do through production systems to the environment.
The classic case of this at the moment, and the one that gets all the publicity, is the Wye, the River Wye, and the fertility from chicken farms and so forth that are going in there and causing algal bloom or whatever. It slightly misses the point. I mean, the nearest I've heard to the point is the production of grain is happening mostly on one side of the country, and on the other side of the country is where you've got all the livestock, right? And that's a completely unbalanced situation. So what's happening is you're producing far too much fertility in chicken farms or dairy farms or whatever, mostly in the west of the country. And then on the other side of the country, there's a dearth of fertility, which has to be made up for by artificial fertilizers. On a well-balanced mixed farm, this doesn't happen, and the livestock are default in the sense that you've got the right amount of livestock to produce the right amount of manure and fertility to grow the crops that you want. And that was how agriculture functioned until about the early 20th century, I guess, to the invention of artificial fertilizers. And what that has meant is that you've got this bifurcated, schizophrenic agricultural system, which is grain in one place, livestock in another, and that produces this mountain of fertility, or actually more lake these days, that's seeping into rivers. And the solution is just obvious, really, which is to go back to mixed farming. And okay, you get a lower yield maybe in the west of your grain, but you still got, you've got a more balanced system, probably higher yields in the east, because if you mix the livestock and the arable, well, certainly higher yields if you're going organic, which is what we want. The nearest I've heard any government minister getting to this was, I forget which one it was of the many, who said, well, one thing we can do is export the manure, the surplus manure, from the west back out to the east. So, which means, of course, just as you've got loads of straw, you could see them almost any day on the A35, straw coming from the east of the country out to the west. You're going to have another load of lorries, well, I suppose maybe they can use the same lorries, going back in the other direction, at a time when we're actually supposed to be reducing transport because of climate change. It's complete, that was completely potty. You keep the livestock and the arable in the same place. You've got the same issue in the Netherlands on a much bigger scale, and where in the Netherlands they've been importing soya and manioc and various other things for this massively oversized agricultural. It's the second agricultural exporter in the world, and it's actually a tiny country. It's daft. and so they got a huge surplus of manure and fertility in Netherlands, which has been causing problems for years, actually. I remember back in the 90s, the Netherlands were proposing a solution to the problem was to ship the manure back to Indonesia and places like that. and the Indonesians didn't like this. They said, we're not taking your crap. So that never got anywhere. But that was the same solution as shipping manure from the west to the east of England. And of course now all that's come to the point where the nitrate problem is so intense in the Netherlands that instead of going to a sensible system of farming, they're just, getting rid of a load of farms. Well, which of course is, from a social point of view, it's causing huge problems and distortions of perception about the role of agriculture and all sorts of things.
I think we've kind of come to an end here. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
This has been a really lovely sort of weaving conversation. It's a real privilege to talk. Thank you for your time. It's a real privilege to talk to you. I've got a bottle of wine to say thank you.
Oh, right,
a bottle of English wine.
Thanks for listening in to this episode. Check out the show notes for links relating to this discussion and further reading.
Our thanks go out to the Linbury Trust, whose funding made this podcast series possible.
Don't forget to visit the Agricology website for more information about the practices discussed in today's episode.
There'll be more episodes coming up, so don't forget to tune in again.